Even after the divorce, you're still my father. I'll take all the inheritance I can get. Isn't the insurance money and property division enough? The voice cut through the solemn silence of the funeral hall like a jagged knife. The congregation, previously still, turned to look at the source of the voice. Melissa, my husband's ex-wife, and their son Thomas. They had shown up late, not dressed for the occasion, their presence more of an interruption than anything else. Melissa's sharp voice echoed in the room, while Thomas stood by her side, shifting uncomfortably. It was a moment that had no place in this sacred gathering, Peter's funeral. Yet here we were, facing the very thing Peter had spent years avoiding, an ugly dispute over money. My name is Evelyn, a 36-year-old office worker. My husband, Peter, was a 51-year-old employee who had been previously divorced. His parents had already passed away, and he had a 24-year-old son, Thomas, from his earlier marriage, a fact I had accepted when marrying him. Peter was a serious and compassionate person, highly trusted by those around him. As for having children, we left it in God's hands and chose not to engage in any fertility treatments. We both worked hard and cherished our time together in the evenings, enjoying our daily life. However, one concern persisted. Thomas often claimed that his inability to hold a job was Peter's fault and would frequently ask for money. While I felt giving him money might enable his instability and dependence on Peter, I chose not to interfere. Peter, busy with work, felt guilty about not spending enough time with his son. Isn't this a common scenario for many fathers? My own father often came home late or had to change plans due to work. As a financially comfortable couple, I thought it was fine for Peter to give his son money from his earnings, respecting his wishes, and thus I did not intervene. Then one day, disaster struck. Peter was severely injured in an accident at work. He was hit by a reckless driver while walking at a green light, leaving him unconscious. I left work early and rushed to the hospital. After the surgery, the doctor gave me a detailed explanation. They did everything they could, but Peter's condition remained unstable, and there was a high chance he wouldn't last long. Bring anyone he might want to see, and do it soon, they said, confronting me with a shocking reality. Stunned and unsure of what to do, I knew I had to act quickly. I called my parents, who came to the hospital right away and comforted me. Next, I contacted Peter's friends, some of whom I knew well. The news of his condition spread quickly among his friends and acquaintances, both personal and professional. I took a break from work and spent every day by Peter's side in his hospital room. According to the hospital's new rules, even family members weren't allowed to stay overnight. Filled with anxiety, I sometimes slept in my car in the parking lot. Day and night, visitors came to see Peter. His wonderful personality was evident in the continuous stream of people who came to encourage and support both him and me. One of these visitors was someone close to both of us, both professionally and personally. This friend, familiar to me, visited daily, concerned about my health and cheering Peter up. This friend knew about Peter's ex-wife, Melissa, and their son, Thomas. Though divorced, Peter had never completely cut ties with Melissa due to their son. However, I didn't have Melissa's phone number. When I asked the friend, he knew it and gave it to me. I called her, but Melissa sounded irritated. "I don't care about my ex-husband anymore," she said sharply. Still, I asked if Thomas could visit, but she replied, "I'll ask, but I don't think he'll come," and hung up. I understood that there were unresolved issues between Peter and his son, even with Peter's life in danger. Accepting this, I decided not to push for their visit. Peter's condition did not improve, and there were no signs of him regaining consciousness. The doctor warned that his situation was deteriorating. I hoped Thomas might change his mind and come, but he never showed up. In the end, Peter passed away with me by his side, moving on to the next world. I had no time to immerse myself in grief. Even as Peter was being cared for by the funeral home, I had to proceed with funeral arrangements. With help from my parents and Peter's friends, the preparations steadily progressed. Colleagues, bosses, and juniors from his work offered their help, and the wake went as planned. The next day, the funeral was solemnly conducted, with more people attending than I had anticipated. They offered kind words and encouragement, which warmed my heart. The funeral reminded me of Peter's wonderful character and kindness. Even in this sad event, there were moments that touched me. I thanked Peter's close friends and colleagues for their help and expressed my gratitude to everyone who assisted. That's when I was informed that someone wanted to see me. A man and a woman stood in the distance, dressed inappropriately for a funeral. I recognized the man's face. It must be Thomas, Peter's son, and the woman next to him was likely his ex-wife, Melissa. They appeared in casual attire, standing in an area where people were coming and going after the service had ended. The funeral home staff were preparing to move to the crematorium, but they seemed indifferent. I felt irritation and tension radiating from them. "Who might you be?" I asked, pretending not to recognize them. "What do you mean, who?" Melissa sneered. "Weren't you the one who contacted me?" "Yes, that's right. I asked you to visit him in the hospital, but I don't recall inviting you to the funeral," I replied. "Attend a funeral? We never intended to. Our attire should make that obvious." Melissa's voice dripped with sarcasm. "I thought we should talk before any procedures start. My son has a right to the inheritance. I can't let you monopolize it." Inheritance. It hasn't even been an hour since the funeral ended. There are other things to take care of first. I struggled to contain my anger. Though I wanted to retort, I couldn't find the words. Thomas laughed coldly. "I know the medical bills are covered by workers' compensation, and you've got a hefty settlement from the accident. Plus, you must have received a good amount in condolence money from the funeral. That's great, isn't it?" It became clear that they had been checking on Peter's finances ever since his condition worsened. Melissa must have been investigating, expecting an inheritance. Peter's estate, including the inheritance, is valued at $1.5 million, I said firmly, but the process isn't as simple as you think. Still, they pressed on. "We intend to get our fair share, so keep that in mind, Auntie," Thomas said mockingly. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my anger. It was challenging. Thomas had always been interested in money. He seemed to think only of extracting as much as possible from any source, without considering Peter's feelings. "I've had enough." I raised my voice unintentionally. Sensing the tension, the funeral staff, who had been cleaning up, quickly went to call Peter's closest friend, Jack. "What's going on, Evelyn?" Jack hurried over, and upon seeing Melissa and Thomas, his face hardened. "Can't you two understand the situation?" Melissa, recognizing Jack, sneered again. "Well, if it isn't my ex-husband's buddy. Still close with him, I see. What was it? A brotherly bond between men? Makes me sick," she snapped. Jack remained firm, defending Peter's honor. "How dare you speak ill of him at a time like this?" he said. "If you're only here to argue about inheritance, then leave." Melissa wasn't done. "Declare right here that you'll divide the inheritance properly with Thomas," she demanded, pulling out her phone, ready to record the conversation. Jack was about to turn away, but stopped. "Oh, about the inheritance?" Jack said, turning back to face them. "Your son has a right to it, you say. Can you prove that Thomas is indeed Peter's child?" "What? Why would I need to prove something like that?" Melissa shot back, her tone defensive. "It seems you don't understand," Jack continued calmly. "Peter had doubts during your pregnancy, Melissa. He hired a detective agency to investigate, and it was discovered that despite being married, you were involved with another man." Thomas looked confused. His confidence vanished as Jack's words sank in. "What does that mean?" he demanded, turning to his mother. Melissa's face turned pale, and she trembled. Thomas, realizing something was wrong, shook his mother's shoulder. "What's going on? Tell me." But Melissa remained silent, unable to speak. Finally, Jack revealed the truth. "The blood type of your son didn't match Peter's. It was a great shock to him. He chose not to reveal it to spare you both. But there's no blood relation between your son and Peter." Thomas was speechless. Believing all of his life that Peter was his biological father, he now faced the painful truth. His anger surged, directed at Melissa. "Why didn't you tell me?" he shouted. "I always thought he was my real father." Melissa, cornered, tried to evade the truth, but Thomas' fury only grew. "I won't take the inheritance, even if I have legal rights. I'll relinquish everything," Thomas declared before storming out, leaving his mother standing there in shock. Jack, with compassion in his voice, escorted Melissa out of the venue as she collapsed, her secret exposed to the world. After that day, neither Melissa nor Thomas reappeared in my life. I later heard from Jack that Thomas, knowing the truth about his parentage, had cut ties with his mother. The inheritance battle never resurfaced, and life began to return to normal. One day, I visited the doctor about the health issues that had been troubling me since Peter's accident. I thought it was stress-related, but the diagnosis was a surprise. I was pregnant with Peter's child, a baby boy. The doctor advised me to take care of my health, and I resolved to do so. When I visited Peter's grave to share the joyous news, I noticed unfamiliar flowers and Peter's favorite food offered there. It wasn't his Memorial Day, and only a few people knew his favorite food. I had an intuition that Thomas had visited. Standing before Peter's grave, I whispered, "Hey, it looks like you and Thomas made peace after all. I'm so glad."